suspects are being...
One case involves the FBI is now offering $100,000 to see if the police are releasing.
Hey there, before I get started on this episode, I want to take a moment to address the June 24th Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This decision stripped away the legal right to have a safe and legal abortion. As someone who struggles with miscarriages and infertility, I want to suggest you take the time to research abortions from a healthcare standpoint. I also encourage you to listen to stories of survivors from before Roe v. Wade. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortions, threatens the health and independence of all Americans. This decision could lead to the loss of other rights, including things such as birth control, fertility treatments, gay marriage, and interracial marriage. To learn more about what you can do to help, go to abortions.cav or volunteer locally USOW if you would like to volunteer your time at a clinic. I encourage you to speak up, take care, and spread the word. Welcome to Misty Mysteries, and thank you for listening to my special message beforehand. I'm your host, Keely, and this is a True Crime and Paranormal podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about the murder of Nicole Fitts and the kidnapping of her daughter, Arianna Fitts. I want to warn before listening further that because these crimes involve a child, it can be very hard to listen to. Let's first talk about Nicole Fitts. Nicole is also known by the nickname Nikki, and everyone who knew her has nothing but kind words to say about her. Nikki is described as being very shy and sweet. She's the middle child of 3 girls, her oldest sister Catherine and her youngest sister Contessa, who goes by Tessa. Tessa and Nikki are only a year apart, but as children their mom would dress them in matching outfits and they would get confused as twins. The 2 sisters were very close, and Tessa shares that she often thought about Nikki as more of a younger sister than an older sister. Nikki liked to keep to herself, but this never stopped her from helping out others. During her high school years, she spent most of her time volunteering at her school or volunteering at the recreational center in Culver City, California, where she grew up. Nikki loved helping others and volunteering, so much so that she was given an award by the city of Los Angeles for it. Her school also often gave her awards for volunteer work there and for good work she did as a student. Nikki loved school and she was close to her teachers, often being called the teacher's pet, and ultimately she wanted to become a teacher after graduating high school. Sadly, when Nikki was 16 years old, her mother passed away after battling cancer. Some of their neighbors were able to take Nikki and Tessa into their homes while they went to school and to keep the 2 together. This was until Nikki made the decision to go into the Job Corps. When Nikki went into the Job Corps, her and Tessa went her separate ways. Around 2011, Nikki and Tessa, along with Tessa's girlfriend Claire, decided to move into a place together in Pacifica, California. If you don't know the California area, where Nikki grew up in Culver is in Los Angeles County. It's about 30 minutes, give more than take, depending on the traffic from the city of Los Angeles. Pacifica is in the Bay Area. It's about 15 to 20 minutes away from San Francisco. It's a beachfront town and it's a very vacation-y spot. And like any place in California, it gets expensive, especially the closer you get to the main cities or the beach. While living in Pacifica, Nikki became pregnant with her daughter Arianna, but she started to fall behind on her rent, and though the 3 stayed close, unfortunately housing in Pacifica wasn't affordable, and they decided to go their separate ways. Tessa and Claire moved to Santa Cruz, while Nikki wanted to stay in San Francisco, and ended up living in a homeless shelter with Arianna, who was born on September 6, 2013. Arianna was Nikki's second daughter, but Nikki's family has asked for any information on her first daughter not to be shared for her safety, so I will not mention Nikki's first daughter any further, besides what Tessa has shared that she loves and misses both her sister and her mother very much. Arianna is described as being a very happy and energetic child. She was always smiling and had a contagious smile. She was very curious about everybody. She would smile and wave at everyone when she was in the stores or out of the house. She loved to color, and she loved her mother very much. If Nikki was around, she was this very outgoing kid, but if Nikki left her, all she wanted was her mom. Nikki loved her kids, and she was a good mom to them, even when living situations or financial situations tried to change that. Arianna and Nikki were very happy to be a family and never let living in the shelter get in the way of their bonding. But while the two were living in the shelter, they met a woman named Lamasani Briggs. This woman is described as being a self-proclaimed street pastor, and it is unknown if she has a church where she preaches, but she would go to homeless shelters to preach for people. While doing this, she got to know Nikki and Arianna, and she offered them a place to stay with her and childcare for Arianna so Nikki could find a job and start saving money for a place to stay of her own. Nikki very quickly, after moving in with Briggs, found a job at Best Buy in San Francisco and began to work full-time, plus she would pick up shifts and work overtime. Nikki was a very hard worker, and she started to make the money she needed for her and Arianna. Plus, Briggs's nieces, Solo Hearn and Helena Martin, along with Helena's husband, Devin Martin, offered her cheaper childcare while she worked. It seemed like things were going up for Nikki and Arianna, but unfortunately, Briggs started to become abusive towards Nikki. She began to charge Nikki more in rent, but would not give Nikki the keys to her house even though she was paying more. So if Nikki got off work late, she would have to be locked out of the house for the night. Or if she got home and Briggs wasn't there, she would have to wait outside for her. She became very possessive over Arianna, calling Arianna her baby. She was very verbally abusive, telling Nikki that she was not a good mother and she was a bad influence on Arianna. She would also call Nikki names, and she would go through Nikki's personal belongings, including her laptop. Nikki only knew that she would be going through her laptop because she harassed Nikki about a man that she went on a few dates with, but no one knew about him, and she would only know this if she went through her journal that she writes on her laptop. In November of 2015, Nikki had enough of the abuse, and she called Tessa and Claire to come pick her and Arianna up. Tessa and Claire drove up to San Francisco from Santa Cruz, but Briggs did not make this process easy. She refused to let Nikki into the home to get any of her belongings, not even letting them in to get Arianna's car seat so they could leave with Arianna. Tessa and Claire had to end up calling the San Francisco Police Department, and they sent out a police officer who escorted Nikki while she got her and Arianna's belongings to prevent anything from happening and just so she could actually get into the home to get her belongings. Eventually, the four of them were able to leave, and as they drove down to Tessa and Claire's house in Santa Cruz for Arianna and Nikki to stay with them, Briggs was texting Nikki, telling her to bring her baby back while she was talking about Arianna. Now at Tessa and Claire's, Nikki was now living 2 hours away from her job in San Francisco. But she didn't want to leave her job since she was making good money, and she liked her job as well as her co-workers. Nikki seemed to enjoy being in San Francisco. She had friends and a job. She liked it, but she didn't have her own vehicle and was left taking 2-hour commutes on public transportation. Because of this commute to work and long hours, she would leave Arianna with her babysitter for long hours, sometimes even days. Nikki would work overtime or pick up extra shifts to support her and Arianna. This would leave her getting off of work late, only having a tiny bit of time before her next shift. If public transportation was running, she would use this to go see Arianna. But at times, it was just too late to pick up a sleeping child and put them on public transportation. Or sometimes the public transportation would not be running, and Arianna would have to stay with either Helena or Ciolo, while Nikki slept on friends' and co-workers' couches. At some point during this situation, Helena and Ciolo started to make excuses as to why Nikki couldn't come see Arianna or pick up her daughter and take her home. They were basically keeping her daughter away from her, and it really started to get to Nikki. In March of 2016, it had been 6 weeks since she last saw Arianna, so last she saw Arianna was in February of 2016. One day after her work, her coworker Goyette noticed that Nikki was kind of hanging around the break room after work and asked if she needed a ride home. Nikki got in her car and she broke down, and she explained that she didn't have anywhere to go and just what was happening with Arianna and her housing situation. Goyette, seeing how upset Nikki was, offered her a place to stay with her not too far from work. And when Nikki moved in with Goyette, she encouraged Nikki to report Arianna missing to the police since she hadn't seen her in weeks, but no report has ever been found. And although she didn't report her missing or report the sitters to the police, Nikki told the sitters that she was going to come get Arianna. And she kept getting met with excuses as to why Nikki couldn't get Arianna or see Arianna. Nikki at this point had already bought Arianna her own bed and had gifts for her, and she finally told Helena and Ciolo that she was going to come get Arianna for good. But they told her that Arianna wasn't even in town. They told Nikki that they had taken Arianna out of town to Anaheim to go to Disneyland. So Nikki told them, I'm going to come get her on April 3rd. I want to take a break from my normal script just a little bit to just say that it honestly shocks me the boundaries that were broken with these sitters and Nikki. To not only keep her child away from her, but to take her almost 11 hours away without any permission or even letting her know until she said, I want my daughter back. I also want to note that no one has ever seen any photos from this Disneyland vacation. Sarah Turney brought this up on her podcast, Voices for Justice, and it really made me think because Disneyland is a place where you take photos, so it makes me wonder if she was in Disneyland. But let's go back to the script. Now remember, April 3rd was the setup pickup date for Arianna. But on April 1st, 2016, everything changed. Nikki went to work that day, and after work, she was supposed to meet up with Claire, but Claire had something come up, and Nikki's plans changed. Instead, she hung out with a coworker named Michael. He needed to buy new clothes, so she went to the mall with him to do that. After shopping, she picked up a pizza for her and Goyette for dinner, and before being dropped off at home, Michael said he took her to 7-Eleven, where she got out a couple $100 out of the ATM. Although it's still not confirmed how much she actually got out, it's believed to be about $600. He dropped her off at home, where she and Goyette sat down to eat pizza and watch a movie. But halfway through the movie, she got a call that Goyette said seemed very urgent. She told Goyette that the call was from the babysitters and she was going to go to a restaurant 5 minutes away from the house and she would be back. She just had to meet them really quick. But Nikki never made it back home. Instead, Goyette woke up to a text from Nikki that said going to Fresno with Sam. But no one knew a Sam, and no one knew why she would go 3 hours away when she had no way to get to work the next day, and she never missed work. She was opposite. She always came in for extra shifts. Plus, she was no call, no show that next day for work. And to add to the strangeness of the text, at 1:13 in the morning, there was a new post on her Facebook that said, spending time with my 3-year-old, needed this break. Tessa said this post is strange because Nikki is really big on vocab and spelling, and break, B-R-E-A-K, was spelt like the car instead, B-R-A-K-E. Plus, Arianna was 2, not 3, and why would she be spending time with a 2-year-old at 1 in the morning when a 2-year-old should be sleeping? And the next day on April 3rd, Goyette started to make Facebook posts about Nikki being missing, and it wasn't even until April 5th that Nikki's family found out she was missing. For Nikki and her sisters, it was normal to go days without talking, and the last her sister spoke to her was on Easter. So they never knew anything was wrong until April 5th when Catherine saw the post on Facebook and texted Tessa, "Hey, is Nikki missing?" Tessa told her, "No, I just spoke to her a few days ago." But when they went on Facebook to see what was happening, both her sisters knew they needed to fly to San Francisco and find Nikki. First thing they did when they landed in San Francisco was go to the police. But the police told them they can't do much because of the Facebook post on the 1st saying that she needed a break, and they couldn't prove any foul play. Tessa, Catherine, and Claire knew they needed to take matters into their own hands. They started to call hospitals, jails, any friends or coworkers, and anything else they could think of. This is when they found out about the situation with Arianna and the babysitters, and they knew they needed to figure out who these babysitters were, since no one at this point even knew who the babysitters really were. Nikki always said the babysitters. She never said Helena or Ciolo. Luckily, there was one day where Tessa and Claire drove Arianna and Nikki to, I believe, Helena's house, but she wasn't there and they had to drive them to Ciolo's apartment. Tessa and Claire retraced the drive, starting at Nikki's work. They then went to Helena's and took pictures of her home, and then they went to Ciolo's and took pictures of her apartment. They were then able to find their names and to write down both of their addresses and names for the police. Claire even found Ciolo on Facebook and reached out to her to see if she knew where Nikki or Arianna were, but she never answered her messages. Without police really being able to help, Nikki's sisters did as much as they could to find her, but police didn't take either of their disappearances seriously until April 8th, 2016. On April 8th, 2016, just days after Nikki was reported missing, an employee working on renovations at McLaurin Park in San Francisco saw a piece of plywood with a silver spray-painted symbol on it near the playground. Sadly, when he lifted the plywood, 32-year-old Nicole Fitts was found deceased, lying in the fetal position underneath. A cause of death for Nikki has never been released to the public. This is most likely out of respect for Nicole and her family, or that the police have been very tight-lipped about this investigation into her murder. For a little bit of background on this park, it is the second largest park in San Francisco area, with 313 acres. The park's website describes it as having 6 playgrounds, an off-leash jog area, walking trails, tennis, basketball courts, a reservoir, and golf. I am unsure how this park looks today, though I did see it had a fire recently. Renovations were being done at the time of Nikki's murder, but I mostly found that this park is described as being overgrown and a very open space. But sadly, Nikki was not the first victim to be found at this park. In 1983, a man named Nicholas Crumbly was sexually assaulted and killed by a man named William Payne, who was arrested and charged in 2009. In 2006, a 5-month-old Camille Ferguson was found, and I don't know at the moment if her killer was ever caught, but I saw her father was the main suspect in the case. In 2009, a leg was found in a shallow grave while employees were cleaning out a homeless encampment. And most recently, in 2020, a 51-year-old woman was shot and later passed away in the hospital. This park has definitely seen its share of violence, but with Nikki's death, the police knew they needed to help, and they knew they needed to find Arianna. The first step the police department took into finding Arianna was issuing search warrants for both Ciolo and Helena's cars and homes. These search warrants came up empty for both Arianna and, from what we know, evidence into solving where Arianna is or what happened to Nikki. But again, police are keeping things very close since their case is open and being currently worked on. Police have shared that both of these women have not been cooperating with them in the search for Arianna or Nikki's killer. But during their investigation, they did name Helena a suspect after finding out she had served 6 years for the murder of the father of one of her children. Since being named a suspect, Helena did hire a criminal defense attorney who released a statement that Helena was cooperating with the investigation, but since being named a suspect, he has advised her not to speak on Arianna's disappearance or Nikki's death. The FBI does not believe that Arianna was with Nikki when she died, but they do believe that Nikki's death and Arianna's disappearance are connected. That most likely whoever took Nikki's life is also who has Arianna. They do believe Arianna is alive and was most likely in the Bay Area, but has now spread the search to Nevada and have added billboards throughout California and Nevada. Arianna Fitts was 2 years old when she went missing. She was last seen by her family in February of 2016. At the time of her disappearance, she was 2 feet tall, around 45 pounds. She is described as having brown eyes and black hair, and described as having medium skin tone. Arianna is now 8 years old, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has released 2 age-progressed photos of Arianna. The first when she was 6 years old, and the most recent in April of 2022, where she was 8 years old. I will have these photos on the podcast social media, but I also have a website in the description where you can find the photos as well, to see if you recognize Arianna. As for the investigation into bringing her home and finding her mother's killer, in 2017, a car was searched that is believed to be linked to their case, and from what I could find is still in the custody of the police and the FBI, who are working on the case alongside the San Francisco Police Department. In 2021, a podcast named Inside the FBI that is produced by the FBI and hosted by FBI employees, shared that they have new digital and biological evidence in this case. And most recently, in April of 2022, police held a conference about Arianna and Nikki. During this, the 8-year-old age-progressed photos were released of Arianna. The announcement of the billboards was made, and the decision was made that these billboards will go into Nevada because it's believed Helena and Cielo have moved to Las Vegas. The police announced that they upped the reward for any tips leading to the arrest of Nikki's killer or information on Arianna's whereabouts from $100,000 to $250,000, and this is on top of the $10,000 that Best Buy is also offering. I now want to play you a clip from this conference that I felt is important to add on to this episode.
We know that Nicole was a dedicated mother, a hardworking employee, and she deeply loved her family. We know that at the time of her death, she was working hard to find a safe and stable home for both of her daughters. And we know that Arianna has a loving family that can't wait to find her and bring her home. We can't share with you everything that we know about this case at this time. I know that can be frustrating, but this is an active and ongoing investigation, and we're not going to compromise the integrity of the case. We won't be able to release everything that we know, and there are going to be some questions that we will not be able to answer today. We ask for your patience so that we can protect the integrity of this investigation as it moves forward. I also want to talk briefly about what we don't know, and this is critically important because this is where we need the public's help. We ask that you take a long look at the photos of Arianna, which includes the new age progression photo. Please contact law enforcement if you have any information to share. Even if you have previously talked with us, we want to hear from you again. No detail is too small. Let us worry about assessing the value of that information. We believe there are multiple people with direct knowledge of this case who have not fully cooperated with law enforcement. We believe there's even a larger circle of people with indirect knowledge of what happened. Perhaps you heard of something or thought of something from that night. Perhaps you know more about Nicole's last movements or have heard some information about Arianna's whereabouts. We are asking you please to come forward to law enforcement. You can contact the FBI. You can contact the San Francisco Police Department. If you are uncomfortable talking with law enforcement, we ask that you would contact NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We will never give up looking for Arianna. By now, she is an 8-year-old girl. The FBI and the San Francisco Police Department are working with NCMEC to put up billboards with photos and age progression images of Arianna throughout California and Nevada. We will not stop shining a light on this case because we know we need the public's help to bring Arianna back home. If you have any information on Arianna's whereabouts or the homicide of Nicole, please contact the FBI San Francisco Division at 415-553-7400 or through tips.fbi.gov. Tips can remain anonymous. You can also contact the San Francisco Police Department's Anonymous Tip Line at 415-575-4444. Or you can text a tip to TIP 411 and begin the text message with SFPD. That will guarantee the caller's anonymity. The FBI and our partners here at the San Francisco Police Department have an unwavering resolve to find Arianna and to find those responsible for Nicole's death. We will never give up until this case comes to a resolution. We will never give up until we have justice for Nicole and justice for Arianna.
During this clip, you heard some of what I have shared during this episode, including phone numbers and resources to reach out if you have any information. These will be included in my episode description and on any social media post about the episode. Arianna has a family, including aunts and a sister, who love and miss her very much. They have a loving home for her to come to. If you have seen her or know where she is, please say something. She needs to be home with her family. I want to share with you a statement from Nikki's sister and Arianna's aunt, Tessa, that makes me truly hurt for this family. Tessa said, "Nikki did not deserve what happened to her. Her whole life was giving and taking care of her kids. Bring Arianna home for Nikki. She will want her to be with her family." The last thing I want to share with you today is a story about Nikki's funeral that Sarah Turney shared on her podcast, Voices for Justice. Nikki's funeral was helped paid for by the victims of violent crimes. Nikki was cremated and put into a salt urn. Her family then took a boat ride into the ocean near Marina del Rey. They put her ashes into the ocean and watched as her and her urn dissolved into the water. During this beautiful ceremony, a group of dolphins appeared. Claire shared that they were not just normal gray dolphins, but they had the most beautiful patterns on them. Even a crew member on the boat said that he had never seen anything like this before. Just the patterns on them and how many were all together. It sounds like a very beautiful way to honor Nikki and lay her to rest. For now, I want to thank you for listening to Missy Mysteries. Please stay safe out there, stay hydrated, and I will see you next week for a paranormal episode.